Hello. So this is video number 6, and here I want to cover Jack Kerouac, On the Road, and not just On the Road. I've used that for the title, but in reality, On the Road is it's almost like a bottle that bursts open, and it's really filled with a whole generation of various and very influential American artists. Now, the Beat Generation, and I've tried to cover them before, they kind of, I think about them so often that it's almost absurd. I sometimes want to stop myself from thinking about them because they're such influences on the modern culture and in almost insidious ways that people don't even realize this book is so influential on the culture. Now, from what I've gathered, On the Road was it was considered almost like provocative, I suppose, because the characters in the book just kind of take off to go across the country, and it very much celebrates America, the American continent. It's very much an American thing. We have to see the whole country. Let's go through every state in the Union. But the thing that was really fascinating for me was looking into the formation. I'm quite obsessed with the formation of the beats, where they came from. Now, Jack Kerouac was a graduate, I do believe, of Columbia University. And what's unique about Kerouac is that he actually was a jock in the beginning. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. If you look at some pictures of him, you can kind of see the jock in him, though, and you can even see it in his writings, because it's very much, apple pie, hot dogs at the baseball game, baseball hats, and this. He was like an outcast, but at the same time, such almost like a good old boy. And what's even crazier about it was that he was actually French Canadian. His family came down from Canada at some point. Kerouac grew up speaking French. And then he wrote On the Road. He wrote The Dharma Bums. He wrote Tristezza. I think that was the name of that one. He wrote a lot of books, and they're all kind of similar. What's so interesting on his books is they're really just about day-to-day life. There's no plot, almost, in a way. They're really just about day-to-day living. So through this format, he kind of tries to get across, it seems, how simple he believes life should be, and I do think that that was very integral to the hippie generation that came later. So for anyone who's interested in rock and roll at all, I do think that the Beats are someone that need to be analyzed and checked out and visited at least a little bit, because what the Beats really are is rock and roll before it hit the speakers, before it became audio. Everything was taking place on the page. What I've read, I was reading a biography, or some, there was like a rundown of the Beat Generation, and what they said was, the generation of the '40s, and even partially in the '50s with the Wild people, they were really getting their point across. The Wild people, they were really getting their point across using the pen and the page. They weren't audio. They weren't an audio generation, and so they really liked poems, they liked literature, and they stuck with these things. And ironically, most of the people were actually, well educated. I mean, Allen Ginsberg, who I returned to in video number 7 right after this, who I will return to then, he was very much, he was just a poet. He didn't really do any music and everything. So what happens is, in our generation now, we get disconnect, where there's a bit of a disconnect from this, because, and I tried to go over this many times, this is actually a bit of a problem for me, because uh, the counterculture got disconnected, it got chopped off. Novels now are not really seen as provocative or controversial. So the crowd that's reading all the literature now is very much like, they're just like not controversial people, I suppose. And then we look at On the Road, and they were controversial, and they were the forefathers of punk rock and rock and roll and everything in a way. But we're disconnected from them because they weren't audio. You see, they weren't on the speakers. There's not really a lot of video. Like, I don't think there's a few interviews you can find of Kerouac um, on YouTube, but for the most part, he wasn't really audio, and he kind of goes hand in hand with another artist for me, who I would have written, but this artist is a little, as in the title, and I do want to connect him. I mean, in the notepad here, I have written his name down, and that's Bukowski. Now, Bukowski is a recent find for me, but he's very much tied in with the Beats because Bukowski's mission in life, it seemed, was he was just totally enamored. If you read through him in his poems, he repeats the same theme time and time again. He was just very enamored with just the writing process itself, the lifestyle of the writer, of the or of the artist, just the lifestyle of creation. A lot of the times we read novels these days, or we read songs or whatever, and the artist never really discusses the creative process. Now, Bukowski does it again and again in his work, and really so does Kerouac. For instance, I remember, and it's been years since I've read On the Road, but I remember in the beginning of On the Road, he says the character is a writer, and I've always enjoyed that in a way. Um, so yeah, Bukowski's very much connected with these beats in some way, even though he didn't really want to be. And they're both again just cut off from music as a whole. And of course, Kerouac was connected with Ginsberg, as I said. He was connected with Gregory Corso, who is an Italian American who makes an appearance in the Beat Generation, and he was also connected with William S. Burroughs, who I mentioned in video number 8 because where I talk about Leonardo Da Vinci in video number 8, you'll see. And um, they were trying to bring things forward, these characters, and um, it was really weird because the Beat Generation, like from what I read, was the reason they became so immortalized was really because they were the first like post-war generation. They had the TV at their disposal. They had like mass publication in a way. So their stuff really just took off in a different way, really, than Hemingway, who I spoke about previously in his book. He makes another appearance in this video. But they kind of, they were just connected from all this because they weren't, fighting any wars or anything like that. They were right in the middle. They were really, if when one looks at the Beat Generation, what we're really looking at is really almost the best time of the American time, because you got to figure in the 40s when they would have been, I suppose, in 46 or so. So the World War ends in the 40s, and about 46, 47, that's all over. The Second World War is over, and they enter into this time of peace and prosperity for America. So when we look at the beats then, we're seeing this peace and prosperity for the states, and that's obviously, that's huge. There wasn't really an economic collapse like there is now. We're living through a very different period now, and that's why people look at this book, I think, and they say, this is ridiculous. How the hell could these people have been traveling across the country? Because their characters are very impoverished in the story. Well, I think it was a lot easier to get across the country back then, many times, because, back and forth, because, gas was cheap, everything was cheap. So when you're looking at that book, you're seeing a very different chapter of the States. You're seeing this little bubble of time, this little window when things were great. And then that window kind of lasts throughout the 50s, which I think On the Road might have came out sometime. I think it came out sometime in the 50s, and the exact publication date, I'm sorry for that, but it must have come out sometime in the 50s. And then, all of that peace and prosperity kind of ends, and the beats get chopped in half right when the 60s get rung in, and that's when the audio generation begins, and that's when people start getting angry because that's in Vietnam. Now we're getting into Vietnam. The beats lead us right all up to that, and then everything changes. And Kerouac died before the '60s were out, I think, so he didn't get out of the '60s. He didn't make it out to see the world evolve. But who did what Ginsberg did, and Burroughs did. Burroughs made it, and Ginsberg and Burroughs made it all the way into the mid '90s. And so they got to see the way the Beat Generation turned into something else. For instance, Kerouac's companion Burroughs, not companion, but his compadre, his friend, his amigo, he writes about Burroughs in On the Road, and he calls him Old Bully, and it's like he was this mystical teacher sort of figure because he was a little bit older. And ironically, he was older in the beginning and he outlived everybody. It's strange. But this character is very bizarre. The character of Burroughs, um, and he ended up getting in touch with Kurt Cobain and everything. And they say that he's kind of like the father of punk rock. So I always thought that was very interesting because his writings were very, very controversial, very strange, extremely provocative, really extremely, and they kind of gave rise to punk rock. So from the Beats, we kind of reach, that train kind of stops. It's very countercultural. It's very American. It's all these things. And that's why On the Road I feel is such an entry towards all of this, and Bukowski as well. Even though again it's a shame that there's not a lot of audio from this because I know or movies because anytime something you'll notice goes with visual or audio for us. For instance, recently they made a movie with Andre 3000 of the band Outkast. Um, about Jimi Hendrix. And the second they make those movies, the legend is really it's like revitalized. Like it just comes right back to life. It's lying dormant for a while, kind of like the Great Gatsby, which I talked about in the video about Hemingway in video number 5, right before this one. It's kind of like that. It just comes right back to life. Everybody goes out, runs out, buys the book. Everything, it comes back to life. And we did see a great cinema remake of On the Road, which was pretty good. Viggo Mortensen was in it. He's very good. He's the one who played Burroughs. You can find his clip on the tube. I think it's great. And it was just, it was a great movie. It just captures a very specific time in America when people were happy and creativity, I feel, was at an all-time high. And they broke a lot of doors down for people to this day. And those sort of things should be recalled and remembered because they are the prime movers of that mid-century, that mid-20th century time period for young people. He was probably one of the first writers, Kerouac was, in a way, I think, who spoke for like that young, sort of like 20-something, late teens window of the age. He was really one of the first ones, and he just describes this really epic version of the States when the States was like really just becoming what we know it as today. Uh, we had just won the Second World War, all of that. That's huge. Like we won a world war. It's a big deal. Um, and we see the world as it was after that, and it was a pretty good place to be in America, at least at that time. So that's a part of the reason why it was a bestseller in the New York Times bestsellers list. That book was just a big deal. That's all I have to say about that. So thank you, and that was number 6, Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and I was actually led to that via The Doors.